We did a marriage night last December on the back porch, and we affectionately refer to it as Married with Children. And our goal was to talk about how marriages are affected when we have kids. And we kind of walked away from that night feeling like we probably could have a lot more of a discussion about this. So figured we'd gather some friends together and talk about this a little bit. But I want to just give a quick framework before we start. And it's to say that probably for most generations in almost every culture, we've always had, people are born into families, they're part of a culture or a society, and they have common and accepted ways of doing things. But we kind of live in a time or a culture right now where we're not necessarily sharing all of the same ways of doing things. And so in the past, you'd face something in your marriage, you'd face something with your family or your kids, and you just go talk to your parents, or you talk to your aunt and uncle, or you talk to the people that are closest to you, your closest friends. But now we have access to so much information that it's kind of like it's become, where do I get all this from? I tend to go from the perspective of like, let's hear it from the people that are actually doing it. I'm all for good books and content and hey, podcasts for that matter. But if people don't see it lived out, if they don't hear it lived out amongst the people that they're actually living life with, it doesn't carry much weight. Because we don't know. I remember a time I was really into this one particular author that wrote on marriage and family all the time. And I went and I had lunch with him a couple times. I asked him to come talk to a group of people, everything. And then I asked him this question one time because he had 4 kids, same kind of lineup that we had. And he was 10 years ahead of me maybe, And I thought, I want to know, how did this guy do it? So I was like, hey, what do you do like when your kids get into a fight at the house? And he was like, I don't think my kids have ever gotten into a fight. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to talk to you anymore. Like you're not going to be able to help me because my house is like navigating a fight all the time, and how to balance that out. I mean, not all the time, but like when you have 6 people in a house all at different stages, it puts a lot of tension, but it also puts tension on our marriages. Mm-hmm. So what I want to say today is we're going to try and talk about a few things. Number one, what's the most important thing to consider in your marriage as you raise kids together? Or what are the most important things to consider? And then how do we strengthen our marriage bond by living in agreement and unity with one another? So I'm going to kind of just start with letting you guys introduce yourselves today. We got a good crew here. If whoever wants to say it, just kind of introduce yourself, talk about yourselves, how long you've been married, how many kids you have, whatever you want to add to that. So I'll just let us kind of go around from there. You guys want to start?
Sure.
All right.
So Dan and Danae Lemoyne, we've been married for, I think, 13 years. We're in our 13th year of marriage.
12 or 13.
Yeah. Our parenting journey started as foster parents, actually, in 2020. And then that lasted for about 9 months, and I think a year and a half later, we welcomed Penny. So we got started a little bit later, so we were married for about 10 years before had kiddos, and we have a 2.5-year-old, and we have a 9-month-old or 10-month-old in a couple days.
Yeah.
So
Penny will be 3 next month.
Wow. Goes around quick, man.
yeah.
Dang, before you know it, they'll
We
be
met
all
back in
grown
high
up.
school, so who would have thought? High school Dan and high school Danae would be,
Wait, what year of high school did you guys meet?
Probably junior year of high school.
Wow.
But we didn't start dating until 2 years after college.
Wow, that's right.
But just like knowing knucklehead us
Yeah.
always makes me laugh.
Take some time to realize who your person is, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. All right. Yates.
All right, we are Vic and Molly Yates. We have 5 kids. We are the opposite of Dan and Danae. We started having kids before we were married. So we have a 12-year-old, almost 13, that I had her when I was in college, so we're a blended family. Vic and I got married when she was 5, so we've been married. This is our 8th year of marriage, and since then we've added a whole bunch of kids. So we've got a 12-year-old, almost 13, a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So we've got 5 daughters.
Oh, that's fun.
It's a whole girl party.
All right. You talk about us, yeah.
All right, Ryan and Janet Arneson. We are gonna have our 23rd anniversary in a month or so. And we have 4 kids. Our oldest is 21, and then we have 19, 17, and 14. 3 girls and a boy.
Tell a little bit of how we met.
Oh, yeah, we met at a wedding, but we went to a church that reached out to college students, and we both went into college ministry there and raised our support, and we were on the same staff, and fell in love there on the college campus.
Stuck with me. Yeah.
So are we 90% girls as far as kids go?
My gosh,
And
let's
then
do,
one-
let's do the math.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Like
well,
10?
there's only one.
There would only be
eight.
Ethan.
There's only Ethan.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you have sons, this podcast is not for you.
Yes. Stop listening right now.
Yeah.
Stop listening and find a different one.
We're all starting a wedding budget fund.
Yeah, GoFundMe.
yesterday.
Yes, if you would like to donate, this is the, yeah, we're starting it today, this very moment. So, wow, that's crazy. We have 10 daughters between us. Well, we could really talk about how life can go in a household with a bunch of daughters for sure. Ethan is, I'll just say, we say it all the time, Ethan's going to be like more prepared for marriage than any other kid. Well, I mean, think about the people that came, like Tom Brady came up, 3 girls, just him alone. There's one other person that I just saw.
That's the
other day.
hibachi chef that we had at
Yeah,
the wedding?
exactly.
Oh, the Tom Brady. Okay.
The Tom Brady, yes. The football Tom Brady, yes. We were at a dinner together. Okay.
He's not the exemplar of a great marriage.
Okay,
but-
we're gonna get away from talking about Tom Brady and as it relates to marriage. This is not a football podcast. I do think. Well, here's what I'll say about us. I'm not gonna say anything more about Tom Brady. I promise you, unless we're referring to our chef at the dinner that we had. I think part of the reason why I wanted all of us to talk is because even though we're raising predominantly girls, we're finding out we're all at different stages of that. So like you guys, Lemoyne's, you're at the stage of like you're even though you've been together for a really long time, you're just kind of at the front end of raising kids. Yates, you guys are in the thick of it. You kind of have kids at different stages. And we're getting to the place where like we're getting to the end of raising kids. You know, we have 2 kids out of the house already, one about to get married, and in 3.5 years, none of them will be there anymore. So we're starting to like that journey of transition and reflection. So we're all at different stages, and you can see like in marriage there are some stages that you can tend to identify that are common to everybody. One, you have you're newly married. Next, you're kind of in, if God, for us, we're talking about having kids. So you go through your childbearing years, and then you get into like the education and training years, possibly, what does it mean to discipline kids? What it means to train them in a way they should go? What kind of education do you want to put them through? And then you get into like, kids are starting to transition out of your house, and then you have empty nester, and then you're kind of like, well, what are we going to do for work and retirement at the end? You're more reflecting on life. Somebody told us a long time ago, we went to this one conference every year, and they would talk about a lot about marriage and parenting, mostly parenting. And this one guy said there are really 4 stages of parenting. 0 through 5 is like you're learning the words yes and no, and you're learning whether or not you're going to obey or disobey your parents. And that's kind of, we're kind of, for the most part, these are general numbers, but we're keeping our kids alive, and we're teaching them to know, like, hey, if you don't listen to me in this immediate moment, it could go bad for you. You know, you like for in some regards, it could cost you your life and you have no clue that it could cost you your life, type of a thing. Then you move into like the 5 to 12 and you're really starting to have more conversations with your kids. They're going to push back. You're training them in this is how life is. This is where you're going to go. But there's not a lot of weight yet. Then you get into the like 12 to 18 and you start to like shepherd your kids. How do you make decisions? Let them fail a little bit. Walk alongside them. You're developing a relationship with them where they're gonna become, and they're becoming adults. And then you get into the like, they leave your house and you're trying to figure out, how do we build a good friendship with them where they trust us and they don't go like, I don't have to talk to you anymore, so I'm not gonna, you know? In the midst of all of that, we have all of our relationships, right? We're trying to figure out how do we be married. So let me ask this. I'm in light of that, I'm gonna start with a question. What happened in your marriage that you noticed different when you guys started having kids? What were some of the first things you noticed?
I think for us, it was or at least for me, it was a little bit of I imagine a bigger transition than maybe a lot of folks have, because we've basically worked together our entire marriage leading up to having kids. And so not only did we introduce a little one into the house, it was also Danae stepped out of the business. And so like we went from basically doing everything all the time together to now having like, for the first time, kind of separate days. And it's almost like learning that rhythm a little bit too. So aside from marriage, it's like, okay, how do I connect with you when I used to have all these connection points throughout the day?
Yeah.
In some ways, that's kind of fun to be like, we don't have the same experience every day, but I think that's presented some challenges too.
Yeah. What was that like for you? Yeah.
It was certainly interesting. I think when we talked about starting parenthood as foster parents, it was almost like we were drinking from a fire hose immediately and thrown into the deep end of like, you have a 3 and 5-year-old who you don't know where they're coming from, what was appropriate for them, what their home life looked like. They don't know what is appropriate for them in your home life and how we all fit together. And so I think some of it was like, okay, we're on. We're not just keeping it alive. Like, we're talking parenting, we're talking discipline with a 6-year-old. And so there was some of that I think was a lot, but it was also, I was still working part-time during all of that, and we had a ton of support. We went through just some amazing trainings, TBRI, which is a trauma-based relational intervention, so trauma-informed parenting that very much shapes how we parent today, even with our biological girls. But we had a breather. We had like a year breather where we kind of caught our breath and like regrouped and were like, okay, what went really well in that situation? What didn't? What worked for us? What didn't? And so then welcoming Penny into our world, I was like, all I have to do is like nurse this kid and keep her alive. It felt really smooth, honestly,
Interesting, yeah.
with our first. And then adding a second to the mix has been much more challenging. But I also realized it's been like a slow burn of fatigue with the young ones, whereas my 3 and 5-year-old came sleeping through the night, fully potty trained, and so you're like kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed of like, let's take on the world. Whereas with our girls, I'm like, oh wow, like lack of sleep really makes a difference for like how we communicate, how healthy I am in processing, emotions, thoughts, all of it.
How's it enhanced your marriage, would you say, the most?
Kids?
The kids, yes. Having kids, how's it enhanced your marriage? Because I'm going to ask in a second, how's it taken away or
Send that one to me. How
I have some
has
ideas. I just want to hear yours your ideas first.
yeah.
I think some of it is it forces us into maybe bringing some things to light that previously we could have skirted past for a while. It almost like accentuates areas of shadows. And while it's hard for like in a dying to self way, I also think it's like really real-time sanctification that I truly am grateful for, and not just like in theory. But some of it is like, hey, I thought we were pretty great at communicating. Turns out there are some areas when we're not, or like, and why not? And how is that holding us back and like connecting with one another, with truly serving one another, versus I thought I was pretty great at serving when it didn't inconvenience me too much. But when I'm tired, when I'm sleep deprived, when I'm at my wit's end, then it's like it's more challenging to serve and to love sacrificially. And that's like allowed God to really do some work in my heart. And I think love Dan more holistically and more sacrificially. So I think it's enhanced just being made more like Christ in it.
Cool.
It's also super fun. I just think like I have 2 little girls who look nothing like me. Blue eyes, Dan Lemoyne in female form. And so it's like sometimes it's fun to be like, look at like it's a baby Dan. It's just kind of cute. So that's sweet.
Yeah, that was one of the things that came to my mind too. I think we've always said like we tend to feel like we're a better couple when like people are in close proximity to us. Like when we've had people live with us in different seasons or just have, friends over more often. It's like you're a little bit more keen where you're like, that comment landed a little weird, or I said that and I don't think that was very honoring, and you just have to work through it. And now you got little ones, especially now that Penny's like a toddler, and you can tell she senses it when there's like tension or whatever. You're almost forced to like deal with it a little bit quicker. So yeah, there is like kind of a refining thing. Yeah, and it's just fun to see like a whole different side of like as our family develops, like it's not just us, which it was for a decade, and to kind of think and dream and like see how our dreams have kind of shifted, thinking about kiddos and stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the difference between the two of you, because you guys got, even though you had some years ahead of time where you were fostering, you had a lot of years where it was just the two of you. You guys get kind of like thrown into the fire immediately. Talk about that and your guys' experience in that.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, I think so. When we got married, Peyton was our oldest, was 5. I think it was a mixed bag. I think in a lot of ways I'd parented by myself for 5 years. So in a lot of ways I was like, oh my gosh, there's like another pair of hands. Like somebody else can open fruit snacks and, so in some ways it was like the practical stuff was so awesome, like to have another person like in it. And I think like the emotional, like even the things that like those first few years, like I wanted to enjoy, I wanted to like laugh about something she did or witness something. And so even to get to like enjoy that with somebody was awesome, just to share like the load and, just the whole like sharing, watching your kid grow up. So I think that was like awesome. And then like adding kids. So yeah, it was different. We started with a kid. On the flip side, there was parts of that were difficult. Like I was very used to doing things my way, like even more so than with the rest of our kids. And I'm like a sucker for our oldest because it was just us. So learning to share some of that, learning to back up and give Vic space to do things differently than I would do it. That's been much more difficult for me with our oldest than the 4 other ones. The 4 other ones, I'm like, you got it, Dad's got it, so that's been like a dance. And then since we've been married, we have 4 other daughters, but we've been pregnant 7 times in the 7 years we've been married. So we've been pregnant like every year, sometimes multiple times a year. So I think that has been like adding more babies. Then you have this experience, like the Lemoynes are sharing, of like, oh, we don't sleep. What does it look like to parent together when we're tired? So I think in some ways we were more equipped to like bring in our second because we'd been doing it. And then in some ways it was like, oh, now we've got like a full blown little kid that we're navigating and a baby. I think there's been like parts of it that have been awesome, and then parts of it that has added unique challenges for sure.
Yeah. Vic, talk about it. I'd love to hear your perspective, because you guys haven't had a part of your marriage where kids aren't at the very forefront of it. So yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective too.
Yeah, I think one of the nice things of all the craziness of our house is that while we were dating, we talked about how many kids we wanted. And so we both wanted 5 kids. And so there was already like a notion of like, hey, we're going to load this vehicle up, if you will. And I think that helps a lot, and not like that we accidentally got here. We were like, it was more like planned of like, hey, we want a bunch of kids. And I think also, shout out to the children's ministry here and Suzanne, what they do. To be honest, I did a lot of that work when I was single with no kids, and like spending time with other people's kids just because I wanted to like give back, and I thought it was important for like their marriages. And I think for us, what that meant was both of us were really fans of kids. Like, and I think that's not necessarily the case for everyone, and I know that. And I feel like how they talk about like animal whisperers or whatever. Like I'm a kid whisperer. Like I've interacted with so many kids that like I know there's multiple ways to get their attention and to be able to connect with them. And so for me, stepping into the frame with a wife and our daughter from day one, that was something that I'd already like mapped out, and like it wasn't really stressful just because we had already had a relationship in terms of we were friends for 4 years before we started dating, and I knew Peyton a little bit, and the dynamic had shifted. And I think the biggest thing was knowing that I was the one that was new to the party or late to the party. And so treading lightly on the things that Molly had in place, and doing a lot of observing now that we're in a house together with a daughter, and figuring out like, hey, how can you be an enhancement to what she's gone or what she's established, versus trying to blow the whole thing up and say, all right, welcome, Peyton, to day one of having a father and mother. Like I just know that like that's not the method for communication, and how traumatizing that would be for a child. And so to Molly's point about like adding another child, it was like it wasn't that stressful just because of the thought process like, hey, we want a bunch of kids and we'll figure this out. Now, to what everyone said so far, the stressful part is the lack of sleep, right? And like figuring out who's going to do what to make the family go. And I think as you add more kids, you get into a better rhythm, or hopefully you get in a better rhythm with communication. And from there, that's where you sort of start to hit stride with kids, because people ask like 5, I could never do 5. I'm like, well, I don't recommend doing 5. Like I'm not the person going out there saying everyone should have 5 kids. Like this is Bible. No, but I think that there's a point as a parent where you go, hey, when you feel like you're at the brinks of this is too much, that's probably when you should shut it down. And that's like my recommendation to parents out there. Like when you feel like the world is on fire and crazy and like, man, we can't add another one, stop. and we happen to be at 5 kids right now. And we're like, well, we dabble back and forth. We're like, man, we're actually okay. And then maybe we could do 6. And so I say that as using your common sense to help you navigate the journeys of parenthood and marriage.
I'm thinking about you guys, like your journey, your marriage is unique because you guys are forced into being a team so quickly from the beginning that you don't have that room to like, not to say this the wrong way, like this is, if you don't have kids, you get a little bit of kind of like selfish time in your marriage, which I think is really valuable, but you guys didn't really get that. So you're like in the fire of what it means to be a team really quickly. And time passes really fast that way, doesn't it? Like you have 5 kids, you're 8 years into it already. You turn around twice, it'll be 16 years. But you constantly are learning to be a team. So I'll say just for us, and if you want to say something too, but I think for us, we our oldest, I think, probably suffers from the same disease I do, which is like, what's the next thing always? Like I always want to know, wherever I'm at, I'm always thinking about what's the next place that I want to be at or the next thing I want to do. So when we got married, I think we were probably thinking like, hey, we're not old, not young, we could have kids. I was 27, she was 25, so it was like within a year, Janet was pregnant with Abby, and we were kind of thinking like that's what you do when you get married. And I kind of wish looking back, we would have, not that, I mean, I'm very thankful for Abby, but I wish we would have paused for a moment and just thought, let's enjoy the moment we were in, because we both worked together. We were working in college ministry together. So it felt like we were never at home. We're always at a college campus. We're always at an event. We're always having people over. We went back and looked at it in the first Abby, we had her when we were married 11, or found out we were pregnant at 11 months or something like that, right? It was like, yeah, okay. We don't remember going on a date, just the two of us, in those first 11 months. I can't recall a time we went on a date because we were at an event or at something or at somebody's house or whatever. And I think, I wish we would have done that a little bit more to like think, what would be fun for us. I think we're starting to discover that now on the back end. We're like, hey, we don't have to do a bunch of stuff with our kids all the time. Like, what do we want to do? And we're learning, this is what we loved. Not that we didn't find it along the way, but we're really starting to learn, like, we could do the things we want to do. Let's go do stuff, or let's, whatever, which we find, we start talking about our kids and what are they doing, like, whatever.
You
So
want
I
to
don't
get
know
away
if
from
you-
them so bad, and then you just end up talking about them.
Exactly.
Looking at
That's
pictures
it.
of them.
You're like on a trip somewhere, sitting on the beach, and you're like, hey, what about Abby? What about Hannah? What about Ethan? What's he going to do? We spend 10 hours of a vacation day talking about our kids,
Yeah.
You can't get away from it because you're, to some degree, we come from broken homes. So our perspective is we did not want our kids to experience what we experienced growing up, and what we thought a marriage looked like got destroyed, or was dysfunctional to some degree, and we thought we do not want our kids. We would say, like, probably the best gift we could give to our kids, I think we still say this, is if they see a mom and a dad that love each other and want to be with each other, that will give them an extreme amount of security. Do you want to add anything, Hun, or?
No, I think you pretty much said it. I think we had to figure out, we had a sort of unique story too, because we met where we worked, and then we got engaged. When we got engaged, it was a 3-month engagement. Everything happened really fast, so we didn't take much time, and then we were entrenched in ministry. So we didn't really do a lot of fun things together. We worked really well together. And so then having a baby was like, okay, well, in one regard, it's one way to work together, and we did that well. But we've had to figure out how to play and have fun. And some of that, I think, has just happened with our kids, that I think they think our house is pretty fun, usually, because we've, like, figured that out together along the way. But we didn't really have that before very well. We had to develop it.
I'm going to ask this a little bit later because this is not on our plan for today, but I would love to hear at one point, like, what is the things that you guys enjoy doing, just the two of you, the most? So we'll get to that in a second. But so I want to ask, do you, like, if you guys could define the type or the style of marriage that you guys have, how would you define that? Or even the style that you would want to have? Like, this is the kind of marriage we do have, and there's going to be overlap in this, but what do you want to have? And I'll preface this because if you know Jan and I, or you've spent time around us, we tend to say the same things over, well, at least I do. I say the same things over and over again, but we heard from a couple years and years back that shaped us, saying there were, in their thought process, there was these 4 types of marriages, and it's a little corny, but it was the my thing marriage, the horse trader marriage, the mutual submission marriage, and the partnership marriage. And it was really clear the one that they really wanted you to go to, but like the my thing marriage is like, hey, we're gonna do my thing and you're gonna get on board with it. And that tends to vacillate in every marriage. By the way, all marriages, they would say, experience all 4 of these. So it's not like there's something wrong with these, but you can tend to see if you default into one of them, it starts to be like, give you a picture of like, hey, the default to one of them is probably the most ideal. But you get into a horse trader marriage, and that's like you're just negotiating with each other all the time. Like if you let me do this, I'll do this so that you can do that, and it's a constant negotiation. The mutual submission one's pretty good. Like, hey, we're going to agree that we both like the lives we have, but we're going to kind of encourage you. I'm going to encourage you to do you, and you do you, and I'm on your side, but I'm not necessarily wanting to do what you're doing. Then you have a partnership, which is like, we have agreed on this common purpose in life, common vision, common goal, and we're in it together. And whether we do something together or separate, it all filters into this common goal that we have. So that's just, you don't have to say what I just said. You don't have to say if you fit into one of those, but like, I'd love to hear you guys talk about your style of marriage and the style you really want. Whoever wants to start.
You can go first. Now I don't want to say something great, and then you're like,
We don't have to agree. We're both individuals in this unified front. I think it's somewhere between like going to the 4 examples you have of horse trading and the mutual. And I think that obviously you strive for partnership, but I think in the day-to-day defaults is like, all right, how do I, and I think of the horse trading, I like that a lot of like, all right, I'm gonna tell Molly she should go hang out with the girls, because on Wednesday, I wanna go hang out with the boys. And you do this like, I would say it's unspoken, but it's the mental gymnastics in your head where you're like, okay, hey, you should go to your, no, I don't want to. What about Friday? No, I don't want to. You're like, okay, well, dang. It's going to make me my ass be really hard for Wednesday. And then you're like, man, I just got a text from Jimmy. He wants to go hang out with the fellas there. Are you good with that? Oh, no. Oh, I said you could go with your girls earlier. And it's like, oh, I've just exposed my horse trading. And so I think a little bit of that, and then the mutual of like just trying to delve things out, because both being with young kids is like, you understand the nuances of the week. And I say understand, you don't fully understand what your spouse is going through. No one does, but you understand the nuances of like, hey, when it comes to the weekend especially, like the time is so sacred and so limited that you want to make sure that it's both of you guys are getting what you need in that limited time frame, so that when you get back to your Monday through Friday routine, neither person feels like they were carrying the load of the weekend routinely, because I feel like that's where fights end up happening, is like someone else is like, man, I just love Sunday. We were out on the lake, and then the other person's like, yes, you were out on the lake as I was with the children, having the time of my life as my 4-year-old cried her eyes out because she couldn't watch TV all day. Yes, so.
It's almost impossible. If you are a parent, it's almost impossible to not have some level of horse trading.
Right.
I mean, how do you do it?
Well, and that's what I was thinking. I think some of this is season of life and season of marriage and season of parenthood. Like, we're at the stage where I feel like before there was enough bandwidth for everything. I mean, we had tons of playtime with a decade of married without children. And then with one, it was like, oh, there's plenty of time. I'm still getting pedicures. We're still doing our own thing. And it was
Nap
not.
time was like time you could just do stuff. 'cause
Yeah.
It was just one napping. Yeah.
Now it's like the whole day is nap time. So you're either with one or the other or both. And two, at this age is trickier, because even with our 3 and 5-year-old, I felt like we still had a good deal of flexibility. But so I feel like we are in a stage of like horse trading is really important to the logistics of like, when are we each going to kind of get what we need? How do we negotiate? Is it always like, because we just had a conversation the other day. I'm like, I feel like I start at 6 and I don't end. And so I also know that you get off work, and I can't just expect you to go from 6 until never ending. Like, how do we kind of navigate and negotiate that together? And so there's some of that horse trading that I think is really important, as well as the mutual?
Mutual submission,
Mut-
or mutual support, I guess you could say.
Yeah, of saying like, I know jujitsu is important to him, and I think he's a healthier human, a healthier husband, a healthier dad when he's out moving his body, doing some of these things. except when you come back with back problems, black eye. But for the most part, it's like, I want that for you and I want that for us. So how do we make that happen? But also knowing like I need that same time to move my body to feel really good. Or if this season, if it's not the gym that's making me feel really good, maybe I need more community, like uninterrupted conversation time, whatever it is. And I think that's important as well.
Let me ask a question to all of you, just in light of just listening to the two of you just talk. How important is it to share a common purpose or goal or dream together between the two of you, and that allows you the freedom to have mutual support for each other, to trade with each other, to even at times, and I'm not going to make a case for this, but I think there are times in a marriage where this has happened with both Jan and I, where we just say, no, this is what we're doing. And the other one kind of goes, you're right. So you have those moments, but if you lack a common purpose goal, how hard is that? I love, Molly, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I'm glad Vic went first, because at first when he said like horse trading and mutual submission, I was like, what? Like, I don't feel like that.
Yeah.
But then even as Danae was talking, I'm like, actually, I think in our season of life, like with so many kids and so many demands in the home and outside of the home, I do think logistically that's what it can look like a lot. But I do think, I feel like Vic would think this too, that this like partnership and this common vision for our family and our house to flourish kind of floats the boat with that. Because I can think of marriages, like when you were explaining, I've never heard those terms, but when you were explaining horse trading, I can think of friends that I love that I'm like, oh, that feels like their marriage, this trade. Versus I do think Vic and I have a common, like I want to see Vic flourish and Vic wants to see me flourish, and we trust that about each other. And we know when we flourish individually and collectively as a married couple, like it changes the whole game in our house and for our family. And so I do think there's like a built trust in that. I think there's seasons where that's not there, where you're like exhausted and you're not sleeping, and I'm not believing the best about Vic, and I'm like, oh, you want to do this so that you could do this. I think that comes up in seasons. But I do think this many years in, this many kids in, there is this like foundation of like I want to see you win and you want to see me win. And so I think, but I think logistically, like Danae was, in this season of life, it does look a lot like okay, what do you need this week? What do I need this week? What do we need together? And how do we make that happen? Or else it like all blows up. So
Yeah. What would you guys say? I mean, what's your common purpose vision that you would say for the Yates family? How would you define this is what it means to be in the Yates family?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. I would say if I had to describe that like common vision, I think we're gonna like love and pursue Jesus and others, and we're gonna have a lot of fun. Like awesome. I think our marriage is super fun. I think our house is super I think our kids are like hysterical and ridiculous.
I've never met anybody who doesn't say that about you guys. Like
that we're ridiculous.
No. No, that you guys like if they get in your space, it is so much fun to be around you guys. Like everybody experiences that. And of course, you guys are a reflection of Jesus. Yeah. So that
I want to hang out with the Yates.
Yeah.
You guys come over.
You do want to hang out.
Just down the street.
Yeah. So and that can shape all of your horse trading interactions, because that's what we're after. We do what we have to do. Dan, you look like you got something you want to say.
Oh, I'm almost thinking like the inverse of or like I guess I see like the anti-goal in some people that we know, or we probably all know folks like this, where it's like they're most unified when they are pursuing something. It's just sometimes those things are like temporal. It's like, hey, the new house, and we're really on the same page, and then that kind of high, you get the new house, and then it's like, okay, well, we got to get the new cars, or the this thing or the that thing, and it's just always chasing, and that's not always best for family finances, and it's not, it doesn't have the lasting power of having a vision of like, we're like, for us, our family vision is, spreading the fragrance of Christ for generations. And so like when I leave for work, Penny's like, spread the fragrance of Christ. And I'm like, oh yeah, let's go. And so I think like having that, and like, when you're fried, it's really easy to start believing this narrative that she doesn't have the best intentions for me, or it is she's trying to do this so that I do that or whatever. But when you have that common vision of like, no, like we're about this as a family, and like we can kind of just like guns up for a minute, take a breath, we can come back to the table being like, I know you want good for me and I want good for you. And like, we're actually in this fight together, not against each other. And like, we just had this long conversation kind of up and back from Flagstaff where it's like, we've just been struggling, and it feels like we're struggling against each other. And I think reality is like, we're just struggling with like the logistics of like, how does my day and week flow, and how does your days and week flow in a way that produces us both being healthy and feeling like we have time to like recharge as individuals and connect as a couple. And it feels like it's now, okay, we're on the same team trying to battle time blocking and the blocking and tackling. Whereas like previously, before we had that time to just connect on a drive, was like, no, like you want me to come home and do that. And it just turned into this like tit for tat kind of like bad horse trading instead of like, yeah, we're horse trading still, but like we're both trying to get a win-win here. I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And I think a lot of times we end up at a space where we get into those moments, which we all do. I mean, we've spent lots of times in those moments. I think we probably veered toward the same as you guys. More, we would horse trade and mutual support each other, but we've had to find ways to default back. So you get stuck, like you guys were saying, you start having conversations like, why are we always at each other? Why are we always tense? Why are we're not believing the best about each other? You have to go back and say, all right, what are we about? What are we really doing here? What's the most important things? And we had that experience recently again in our life. Like I think we got to some stages for a little while where we were like, dude, we know what we're doing. We're kind of flowing. We've raised kids mostly, and then we shook up our house with a few decisions that we made that was like all of a sudden we didn't have a clue what we were doing. All the kids had different opinions of that, and we lost what it meant to be on the same page with each other for a while and couldn't figure it out. We had to do a whole like revisiting of what we believe. And to one of you said it earlier, like this, I think you said the stage of life that you're at had to dictate that to us. Like I remember being at your guys' stage and your guys' stage and the tension of those stages. And a part of me yearns for that tension because it felt like we could so quickly turn the ship, like we were in so much control of the narrative, and now we're not in control of that. I'm saying we can be in control of us, but like we can't tell everybody what's going to happen in our home anymore or how it's going to happen, which is a weird, or what to do.
That's crazy.
That's a weird, go ahead.
So I guess the lesson that I want to learn or take away from this is like, how do you maintain like a fertile spirit of like openness to say like, yeah, hey, we need to hit the reset button versus like, I feel like the temptation is, or where the devil wants to get you is like, I want to isolate you. I want you to believe that you're alone in this, that she doesn't care. She doesn't understand your struggles and vice versa. And then you just are like, well, no. And then bitterness and like all the icky stuff builds.
Yeah.
How
Even like above and below the line leadership. I think that, why don't you touch on that for me?
well, I guess my question is like, how do you have that presence of mind to be like, hey, you need to hit the reset button and kind of come back to the table together and recalibrate here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear how you guys answer this question, but for us, it tends to be that other people get involved, either by inserting themselves or by us going, we can't get over this. Like we need somebody to give or we need several people, however many people you allow in your life. I think you both need people we both need people that we trust, that we know if we go talk to this person or this group of people or this other couple, they're not going to be on my side or your side. They're going to be on our side. And so I have people in my life personally, then we have people, and I think she has people, and then we share those people. And so we had those moments in the last year and a half where we were like, we can't get over where we're stuck. And we needed, and I'm not saying the Bible was key, prayer was key, journaling was key. These things were huge. But it didn't really change until we started involving other people in it, because now we're accountable to people we look at. In our case, some of those people were our kids. We literally had to tell our kids, because they already knew it. Kids are the older your kids get, the more like something's not right with you guys. Like what's going on with you? Because our life is shaken up because you guys aren't right. And kids don't like that feeling. I know that feeling really, really well as a kid. That feeling was more than half of my childhood. Was like, dude, the house could explode at any moment. So that's how would you guys say?
I mean, what you said, that's the first thing that came to mind. I think I would say we do marriage communally. Like, we do not, I don't think there's like anything that we've navigated that we haven't like brought other people into. We use the language a lot of like stuck, instead of it feeling like this big dramatic thing. It's like, hey, we're just stuck. So we have, we've got a bunch of people that step into our marriage all the time. We have people who've like just literally sat on the couch and listened to us have the same fight that we've had like 8 times. And it provides like a third party to be like, hey, that's not what they said. That's not what she said. So I think that like changes the game for us. I would say, so that like doing marriage communally, I would say reminding, and I think maybe you touched on this, like when you were talking about like the enemy, like we were just chatting with a younger couple the other day, and I said to them, this is something I have to say to myself often in this season, like there really is an enemy, and it's not Vic. Like, there really is an enemy that would love to see our marriage not feel unified or not feel joyful or any of these things. And I think that's like a good reset for believers, because it feels like there's an enemy, because there is an enemy. And I think your that tension just gets misdirected at your spouse or your kids or you know what I mean? So I think even just being able to acknowledge there really is an enemy in the room. It's just not my spouse. And I think other people help you do that. Other people are like, hey, And then I just think rhythms, and I think we'll touch on this later, but just rhythms of connection are huge. Like, when you're mostly connecting, to be like, did you make dinner? Are you picking this up? Can you be here at this time? Like, so I think finding rhythms of connection that are non-negotiable has been like super helpful too.
That's huge.
And one thing I would add is counseling. I'm a big person that is not like burn the ships and hang all your belongings on the counseling, but I do think that when you talk about being stuck, that sometimes counseling is good for the individuals and collectively, because there's just a wisdom that counselors have or should have that will give you tools to be able to identify where you're getting stuck at. And sometimes it's less about your spouse and more about you. And other times it's more about your spouse and less about you. And that's what you sort of get from the tools of counseling. But I would say before that, of like having relationship mentors or like a safe couple that you guys can go and like vent to your frustrations is like going to save you a lot of money. And it's also going to save you a lot of time, because typically those people are more accessible than the counselors, and they don't come with the Venmo, but you should love on them with some type of gratefulness to let them know that you appreciate their time.
We're starting a second fund on this podcast. We're going to be up to a few funds by the time we get done.
But like when I look at people that have hit, and we've hit the ruts, and this is how we've sort of come out of them, but I look at people that have not come out of those ruts, and you go, I've always said, and Molly too, of like, hey, if we were left to ourselves, we would destroy each other. Like, relationally, if there was no one else speaking into our marriage, and we're not talking about like your parents or your grandparents, we're talking about like outsiders who share the same belief system as you, that are a little bit further in the game and wiser and have shown the fruit of faithfulness in the relationship. When those type of people are your, what I would call relational referees, those are the people that you want, because they can coach both of you up of like, oh, here's where you're missing Molly at, Vic, and Molly, here's where you're missing Victor at. And I'm like, what? I didn't know that. And Molly's like, that's what I was trying to tell him. So I feel like having people that are further along in the game to help you is huge, and also that counseling piece.
I would just, to the friends and mentors, I would just throw in like knowing who these people are and what they are. I think like, so I've got a couple of friends, if they listen to this, they'll laugh because they'll know which one they are. I've got some friends who I'm like, I just need to vent. Like, this has been a rough week. Like, I just need to, and they'll mostly listen, and they don't, I would not recommend like trying to navigate marriage stuff with people who aren't supportive of your marriage or don't have like traits in their own marriage that you would like to emulate. But I do have spaces and friends that I'm like, hey, I'm not really looking for tools right now. I just need a space to like share this and process it. And then I have one, like I would say probably my most consistent mentor. I know she's going to let me vent and process, but then I always know at some point she's going to encourage me to be curious about, she always uses that word, like being curious about Vic, being curious about why he's acting the way he is. And it always irritates me at first because I'm like, I don't want to be curious. I want to be mad. So I think having those people, like Ryan kind of touched on, that are going to, I need to hear that often. Like, I need to be curious about what is going on with Vic, and I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
So, but I think going to those people and knowing that they're going to love you, support you, let you vent, affirm you, and also like challenge you to like see another side.
I know Jordan Williams said to us the other day, we were talking about kids stuff, and she said, just invite your kids to have a good attitude, or invite them into a conversation. Like, wow, what a great word. Like, I've never invited my kids in anything. Like, you better have a great attitude. You better, and the more you get in, the more you realize, like, it's probably better to be curious or to invite somebody in than it is to like demand that something happens. All right, let me ask another question. We've kind of been talking about this already, but we'll just quantify it maybe a little bit. When you think of the kind of household your kids grow up in, what kind of home do you want them to grow up in? And think of this question in the context of your marriage. You two are creating this home for them. Because we get the opportunity to shape what the world looks like to our kids. They find out what marriage is like through us, what family is like through us, what vacation and rest and technology and conflict and communication and friendship and all those things, church. They find out all of that by looking at us. Define how you would say, this is the kind of home I would want my kids to grow up in when they look at us as a couple. And I'd love to hear from you too. You haven't said much. I know you're not. Would you be ready to say something?
Yeah, I can
Okay.
say. I would hope that it would be a God-centered home, ultimately, we're pointing you to Christ all the time. We're pointing you to his word. Whether I feel like there's always a lot of conflict. I think we just have like this really loud Italian family. And so everyone loves to share all their thoughts and opinions. And so it's fun and wild and loud. But I also think too, we're going to have conflict, but I feel safe in our home because I know we will always resolve it. And that's something that I want to be like a mark of our home. And I do appreciate, even in our daughter that's engaged, it's funny, she said like about her fiance before they were engaged or anything, she's like, I needed to get in some fights with him to know if he was really the real deal or not, because I got to know, like, does he resolve it well with me? Like, will he enter in and will we resolve it? And that like helped her trust him,
I think ultimately it can be really tempting. I'm like a type A personality. I'm kind of a freak in some areas. Like, I want to be like, go through that checklist of like technology, vacation, like what does that all look like? And at the end of the day, I think I want our home to be a place of equipping to navigate our world through a godly worldview. Right? And so we've worked on this past year just kind of coming up with like some family values and what do those look like. But really, like, how do we take those off of a chart on our door and bring those into our conversations, into our discipline, into just kind of all aspects of life. And I think that is my heart of like, if we can equip our girls to be thinking about things from a godly point of view, and if we can equip them to live out their values, I think vacations are going to look very different for Penny than they would for Salma, than they would for me, than they would for Dan. And that's okay. But if a central part of vacation is like to rest because God rested and because it's a gift to us, then we can rest through mountain climbing, or we can rest through movies. Or, hey, if we're really talking about one of our values is just shalom and being an ambassador of shalom, if we really talk about like all things being right and helping to be like co-laboring with Christ and bringing peace, then it's going to talk about, then we're going to start talking about like, okay, which friendships are the healthiest for us? How do we navigate this particular situation with a friend, instead of, this is how I'd like to curate your friend group. So just like, how do we really bring some of those things to life through just ongoing real life discipleship and the small things to equip them to kind of navigate.
Yeah, we talked about this in our, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but we talked about in the marriage night that we did, these 3 different kind of homes that you can have: a child-centered home, a parent-centered home, or a God-centered home. And it's not to mean that these are in competition with each other or whatever, because again, like the marriage styles, all of those are going to play out in our regular life. But you can see it if you think about different homes. Like, some homes are like everything that you do is centered only around what the kids say, right? Then you have those homes that like, and we all know these homes where like everything is centered around whatever the mom or the dad wants. That's all they're doing. Like, there's no movement. It's just, but then you have this God-centered home, which is kind of like we're all trying to now we get to define this early on in our kids' lives, but we're trying to figure out, what is God saying to us as a family, and how do we follow him? And that goes back to some of the things we said earlier about our vision for our families. Like, we're defining that right now, but that will, as kids get older, they start to buy into that and they'll carry it on or whatever, but they feel like they're part of it. They're going to put their 2 cents into their opinion on that. And you have to be ready to be like, you'll find out really fast if it was all about them or all about you, because you'll start to see your reactions to it. They'll either feel hyper entitled, or they'll feel like they can't say a word because they don't want to cross you. You know, there's somewhere in the middle where there's a respect for who mom and dad are, but there's also like you're part of this whole thing.
I also think their little bodies show it. Like our young age kids, like I remember our 3 and 5-year-olds, Zaylee and Zion, I would know that I had like pushed it with too many errands or too much fun stuff, and it wasn't benefiting them when I would just like see their little bodies like getting in and out of the car, and I'm like, yeah, this was like too much of a day. And that was kind of indicative of like, wow, I wasn't reading their needs well, and it was kind of more my plan or what I needed to do. And there are days, right, where you kind of flip. Hey, we have to get some of these things done, or you're in a little stage where this would be great to let you have a little more voice. But I think overall, too, even before they can articulate it in that way, I think their bodies will show us.
Totally. All right, I got a couple more questions, but I really would love to hear this. And this can just be like, maybe you've thought about this ahead of time, because I did ask you guys to think about some of these questions. Have you had a moment where you've had a disagreement on something in your marriage, or it could be or about your kids, but have you had a moment where you like, we had a really sharp disagreement about what we believe about this, and what did that look like? How'd you handle it?
I'll go with the one that we're both thinking of, and not the one that I'm just thinking of. So we got into a conversation about having a dog in our house with multiple kids, and I feel like the way that we handled it was we hit this place where we would say we were both stuck, and then we brought in outside counsel from both being stuck, and I feel like that helped, but we did not hit a resolve from there either, oddly enough, and we took some more time to talk about it and not make a move from it, and then we reconvened and decided to get the dog. And so, oh, there's laughter, so that must be something funny, folks. As we got the dog, I feel like we've had the dog for 2.5 years. 2.5 years, and
2 years of your life, or what?
you said what?
The longest 2 years of your life?
Yes, the longest 2 years of our life, and I would say whoever the front runner was for the dog, they have vocalized that this may not have been the best idea, but ultimately, overrightness is oneness, and so oneness was where we
phrase right
landed
there.
on the dog, and then hearing the rightness on the back end was I'd say probably comical relief, but I would say that was like a huge one. And one of the phrases, especially in that time, would be, "We're in a fight about the dog, but it's not about the dog." It's like, it's like this division in this place of not oneness, and as we understood, like the dog, but like we were landlocked on different sides and views of like, I really want the dog, I really don't want the dog. And so we came to a place ultimately where we picked oneness and saying, hey, here's how we're going to move forward. And I think that was the most important thing of the situation, but realizing when you hit those moments of like pumping your brakes and starting to bring in other people and other things so that you can try and get resolved. Because I feel like sometimes people are trying to quickly get to the resolve of the conflict, and sometimes it's like a season, and that's where we were at, of like a season of conflict with this thing. And there would literally be times where there'd be a conversation, and somehow it would bleed into the dog, and then it was like the other person's like, oh shoot, we're talking about the dog again, but we don't have the dog yet, and like we're not gonna land on it, and trying to like, how do we gently affirm the desires of this conversation while also saying we're not going to make a decision in this conversation. So I feel like ultimately it's this mindset of like, through marriage, you hit these ruts of where you guys are clearly on other sides of the table, and then you want to find a way that you can eventually be on the same side of the table.
I feel like I need to speak into Doggate.
Let's do it.
Doggate. Okay. Repent. Repent on Doggate on a podcast. I repent on Doggate. You guys, when I tell you, he's not kidding. And all of the things we have fought about this dog, who's now named Tank, more than anything else we've ever fought about. And like he said, it has nothing to do. I mean, now it has something to do with the dog a little bit because dog's here. But so whoever's listening, like insert whatever your thing is, not the dog. But now I feel like hindsight is 2020. I can look back. So spoiler alert, Vic did not want a dog. I wanted a dog. But to be able to look back and say, like, we were navigating, I mean, I'm like staying home with our kids. We're navigating adopting, like out of kinship care for Victor's family. And there's the dog became this symbol, I think, for both of us of like, is there space for me here? Like, can my needs be met or my wants be met? I think it all really came down to these like deeper questions about our marriage, about our family, about how we fit together, how we make decisions together. We got the dog. We should have never got the dog. But now I do love the dog, but I did tell Vic a couple weeks ago, I'm like, we should have never got this dog. I will say, though, I do feel like the dog now is extremely unifying because we share this joint agreement that our kids don't do nothing for this dog, even though they had all of these promises about the dog. So I do feel like God has used it now as like but I remember at one point literally telling like one of my mentors, Vic is going to be bringing up this dog till we're 80. Like, we're going to be 80, and Vic is going to be like, I told you we shouldn't get the dog, So, but I do think, like, it's a funny example, but it's also, I think, in our marriage, it's been super formative. On the back end, it's been super formative of, like, what is underneath this. And, yeah, so now we have 5 kids and a dog that's, like, the size of a donkey, so.
But hey, What if the world could be filled with kids whose parents decide that unity is more important than rightness, but not knowing that that doesn't mean you have to agree on everything? I think that's valuable. Is if you realize that your parents could disagree with something and still pick to be unified, even if you make fun of it, put whatever, that changes
Yeah.
kids' perspectives on life, that, hey, we could disagree and I could still find a place of unity with you. And on the back end, we could learn what that all means. What would you guys say? Or we could go if you
Well,
guys need to say.
I appreciate that, like, sum up of the takeaway, because I feel like we all could probably think of, marriages, whether that's our parents' marriages or otherwise, where it's like, hey, we chose unity, but there was like this undercurrent of bitterness
Totally.
that just like compounded, right?
Totally.
So yeah, I love that. I can't think of like one inciting incident or one thing that was like super. I mean, we've for sure had our fair share of disagreements and things like that. I think for us, at least from my perspective, it comes back to like stylistically in relationships and like, oh, we're in this same pattern again of like, you're getting insecure, I'm getting defensive, and we're just like spiraling downwards and trying to figure out how do we shorten that, or like a lot of it is just even recognizing like, hey, we're doing that thing again. It's not just
Yeah.
about like feeling guilty that we're doing it again. It's just like being able to recognize like, okay, we're in that pattern again. And then for us, like one of our big challenges, like kind of like we can come to like a intellectual understanding and even an empathy, but they like rounding out that comfort circle, if you will, to like actually like relationally like coming back together with like a hug or like a kiss. And I think we're seeing with kids, I feel like that's really important for them to see
Yeah.
modeled, that it's like, it's not just like, oh, mom and dad had this blow up and then they went and they resolved it kind of behind closed doors, but we're kind of still like, are they good? Are they not? Like for them to see that like
Yeah.
mom and dad are good. Like we're
Yeah.
okay. We're physically back together.
Yeah.
I think is something we learned from a book called How We Love. That's just continues to be a challenge for us because I think both of us just are prideful and want to be like right. And even if it's like, okay, I can see where you're coming from, but like, I don't want a hug from you right now. Like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, I'm just kind of,
Yeah.
I'm mad, you know?
Yeah. It's, I think in past generations, there was a high value put on, never saw my parents fight, never saw them resolve. Like they always went behind closed doors, and there was like a value to that. And I'm not dismissing that value, I get that. But I do think there's also a value of your kids seeing that you have conflict, and then, like you said, they actually see it worked out, like they're resolved. That could make kids realize, I could live in a world where I could duke it out with somebody and then get right with them and have a relationship restored. And it's not, you're not really restoring your marriage, but you are restoring the micro fracture in any of those things in the moment. It's huge. Kids can get very secure in knowing it could go bad and it will get resolved.
Well, it's even interesting to that. Like it's not just your kids. Like your marriage is like this ministry that provides can provide like a really beautiful shadow for others. Like in RRC, our like Redemption Community Small Group, we had new people in. It was kind of growing, and we had shout out to Clark, Dr. Clark Chen was like in our group, and we had like a game night, and we have a rule that's like we're not on different teams because like I'll get it. She cheats. So if she's cheating, asymmetrical warfare we'll call it. But like if she's cheating, I want her on my team. You know what I'm saying? Or she just bends the rules. Like she'll be in the charcoal gray area of the gray area on certain things. And so we kind of started we were on separate teams. I started getting a little chippy, and like you could tell like Clark was like really, he was like, are you guys okay? Like he was just really like legitimately worried. It's like Dan and Danae, this couple's on the rocks, and I'm like, dude, this is just us right now. Like I'm trying to win at this game, okay? And that has nothing to do with a marriage. I'm just trying to win. But like just like that, that little bit of relational, we were chopping it up a little bit, maybe get a little snippy with each other, like. That created insecurity for an adult guy, and it's like I feel that I see that with other couples, and you can kind of sense it, and so I think that can provide safety for others, not just your kids, when your marriage is strong.
Totally. I'll go real quick for us because I know we're probably coming to the end of our time here. 2:30 again. I'll just say, like, for us, the only one that comes to my mind, I don't know if this is what's coming to your mind, but the educational side of our family is we chose to homeschool our kids early on. And we said we're going to review that year by year, but really it wasn't a review. It was just that's what we're doing. And I started to talk to Janet when Abby was in about 6th grade and said, hey, I think it might be a good idea for Abby to go to school. Like, I think that would be a better option for her. Like, if we're taking it kid by kid and, whatever. And that was a 3-year-long conversation of, like, because we valued and I valued, like, I don't want to make this decision unless we're on the same page together. And we thought, it was for the value of our kids, but we're realizing it was my thought versus her thought for a long time. And there's a lot at play in there. And I would say it affected our marriage to the point where we couldn't land on something for a while. But to what, Vic, you were saying, like, the unity piece was more important to us. So we had this 3-year-long conversation that really ended up shaping the rest of all of how we raise our kids from that point on. And we had to duke it out. And it never got like,
Poor Abby.
yeah,
Just like, we got to test it out with
Yeah.
you so we can figure it out for the other kids.
exactly. I know Abby, she got the brunt of all of our bad parenting and the tension in our marriage without.
That's the third fund for the oldest
Exactly.
child. Therapy in the future.
Yes, we need. She and there's nobody that would lobby more for that than Abby. Let's end on this last question. This could be really quick. Just say one decision that you've made in your marriage that you think has had the biggest effect on your marriage. I'll give you an example. When we first got married, I liked to go to bed. Well, I was used to going to bed really late at night because we were college ministry. And Janet liked to go to bed a lot earlier than I went to bed. Like, there was many nights.
It was not that early.
Okay.
Neither.
She doesn't remember how early it
like
was.
10.
No, it was about 8:30.
Yeah.
It was about
I
8:30.
see the
support,
sun
I
going
support
down.
like dinner time.
Agree to disagree
Yeah.
on this podcast.
No,
Oneness over.
What happened was I decided, this is literally the best decision I've ever made in our marriage. I decided I'm going to bed whenever Janet goes to bed. Because ironically that I went to bed late, I am an early riser, so I get up and start going. She's not an early riser, but I knew we weren't going to spend mornings together. That wasn't an option. So I just sit, and the first year or two of that was just like, what am I doing? I'm not tired. I don't want to go to bed, like whatever. But she was like, I am going to end every day with my wife. And we're 23 years in, and still to this day, like, all the kids were home for Christmas at the same time. They're all up watching movies. And it was like, we're going to watch another movie. And, Janet's like, I'm going to bed, like,
At like 10:30, right?
somewhere right around there. Yeah.
Between
Yeah.
8 and
party
10:30.
animal.
Somewhere in there. And it was, I'm going to bed too. And she always is like, no, you can stay up and do whatever you want to. No, I'm going to bed. And the kids are always like, Dad, why don't you stay up and watch a movie? Like, no, I finish every day with your mom, that has kept me from probably a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, a lot of, who knows what I would have thought about, watched, considered, everything in a time where it was like I could just be with my wife. I don't have a lot of those temptations that you can have early in the morning. I don't know, like, I'm ready to like work and stuff. So that is, I'll just say that's probably the best. Anybody want to add to that? Like a best decision that's really affected your whole marriage?
I feel like we've done that pretty good. Although now when I do stay like up late, it feels like super special. Like, oh, I'm going to stay up. You're going to bed. Like, I'm going to stay up because it's so rare. I was thinking more on like the big change. Ours was like moving out of the country, and then deciding to move back. We're probably too big, kind of trajectory altering stuff for our, but as far as like the rhythms, Can you think of
No, it
anything?
doesn't have to be rhythms. It's just whatever you think is the biggest effect on your marriage, yeah.
Yeah, then I think moving to the Dominican Republic our first year, after 6 weeks of being married,
Wow.
don't recommend that
Yeah.
to the average person, but I think God really used that. We were away from everyone and everything, and we just had to figure out, like, how do we spend time together? How do we play? How do we do kind of all of these things on a different budget, in a different place?
No electricity at some times, no water. Like you just have to. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
whole new,
So poor. We were so poor.
whole new family. Yeah, just really had a blank slate in all the ways.
Yeah.
But I also think just recently, one of the most impactful things we've done is just like been ruthless with our calendar. I think we've just like chronically been overcommitted to good things, to nice things, to fun things. But it was just taking such a toll on us. And I think Penny was such a gift for us in that, of like forcing us to slow down a little bit. We couldn't do something every night of the week, and work events, everything. And I feel like having a slower pace of life has been so healthy for us both, don't you think?
Yeah.
And that was one of, to loop back to your earlier question of Dan's earlier question, how do you kind of maintain a fertile heart posture? I think some of mine is just like having time to actually reflect on it. And when I'm not in survival mode, then I actually will. But in survival mode, I'm like, no, we just got to go. We got to do this. We don't have time to fight. And so I think having a slower pace of life, a calendar where we're more apt to say no, has been really good to just like, it brings up healthy conversations. We're more well rested, have more kind of in between playtime, downtime, non-stressful time. So that's something we've loved.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think for us, I would say we aim to do a date a week. It's kind of like non-negotiable for us, which I know people are like, you got 5 kids.
Yeah.
And we get creative. Sometimes it's free. We put the kids to bed and we just walk in front of the house back and forth outside.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah,
I
we
wanna steal that.
we like trade babysitting with friends. We find time to like once a week. Then if it's like a crazy season and we miss a date, then it's like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks max. We go without a date. But we've done that for a few years. And it's like I'll drive to Vic's work and eat lunch with him in the office if I have to. Last week, Vic wanted to go to a high school basketball game. I could care less about high school basketball. But I was like, okay, we'll get 20 minutes in the car together to the game. I'll scroll on Instagram in the background while he watches the game. And then we get 20 minutes in the car on the way home. So that's been like a non-negotiable for us.
that's awesome.
Sometimes we'll be in the car and we'll tell the kids, we're like, oh, we're on a date, the partition's up. And we just ignore it, so I think
hate that.
they hate the kids hate the
Partition's up, and
partition.
there's
That's
no
like their
partition,
worst.
but we just act like it's
Yes.
there. So it's
So
imaginary.
yeah, we go
Partition's
grocery
up.
shopping. Yeah, I just
It's like
think
Dwight
finding.
Schrute from The Office. Remember?
Yeah.
Shun, unshun, reshun.
Yes. So I think I feel like for me, I would be interested to hear Vic's, but for me, it's been the date a week is like even if we only get 40 minutes, it's like a non-negotiable.
That's great.
I think for me, I would say deleting or not using social media for like 3 years. So when we were newly married, like I wasn't using social media, and it wasn't that I planned on 3 years. So I think it's less of the time frame. But I think for newlyweds, you can get so caught up in your happiness and what it's supposed to look like, whether it's the honeymoon or X, Y, and Z, and like you're always with social media. Sometimes I think the default is trying to perform and show off like the highlights of your life. And I think foundationally for us, it was good that like those moments that I was trying to perform or like absorb was spent with Molly and Peyton and our young ones. And it was not me trying to document it of like, hey, check this out. And I think that allowed a foundation of like, hey, as much as we like the scrolling and stuff, realizing that like, hey, I have more of an importance and focus on the time with my family than trying to share that time with others with my family. So, yeah.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah,
Anything?
I'll add real quick.
Yeah.
One couple had given us advice when we first got engaged, and they said that scripture, never let the sun go down on your anger, was really shaping for them because they decided we're just not going to go to bed angry with each other. And that, I feel like, has
We haven't slept for
Adult.
like 3 weeks.
Red Bull.
Stay away.
to get through
Yeah.
it. Everybody needs to take a sleep.
Right, and that doesn't mean we always resolve it, but we'll get to a point where we've even said, okay, I love you. We can give each other a hug and kiss and go, I love you. We're gonna have to keep talking about this, but we're not going to bed angry. And we did one time we didn't do it. We woke up and we were both like kind of off, and we saw each other, and it was like, oh, excuse me, you know, like,
Oh, yeah.
and it was this weird. And we were like, this is terrible. We're never doing that again. And I feel like that. I guess every time I talk, it's about reconciliation.
That's good though. Yeah.
But that's mine.
Yeah, that's usually when we pick fights together. Is at it's like I'm tucking in, and she's like, "Hey, can we talk about something?" I'm like, or I'm picking a fight, and she's about to turn off the light. That's like our.
Let me
I
just
think
say,
we maybe misread that scripture. It's like,
No.
go to bed fighting.
it's funny, the attempting to have a good conversation at night is if you are a newly married couple listening to this, do not attempt to solve your problems at night before you go to bed.
If the only thing you heard today was that is
Just
Amen.
don't,
Amen.
just don't,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Go to bed, yeah,
Yeah, your
Or
best
my-
work is not
yeah.
at the end of your day. Like
Yes.
at the very end.
yes,
I remember
totally.
my dad once was like, "Yeah, he's like, if fights would be a lot easier if everybody just got naked first." And I was like, "All right, maybe if you're gonna fight after 11 p.m., you both have to be butt naked."
I love that. I heard someone else say
What a
that.
way
This-
to end this.
This is how we are going to end
Two
that.
takeaways.
Yeah, 2 takeaways. Yes. Well, thank you guys for being here, and
Thanks for having us.
we'll just. I'll finalize by saying, don't forget the 3 funds that we started during this time. That you're gonna. We'll post them somewhere. I don't know, on social media. Vic's social media. We'll post them on that. No, just remember, if we could end it anyway, just to say, like, our marriages probably have and I think in our cultural moment, probably have the greatest opportunity for the gospel out of there's a lot of opportunities for the gospel. There's not many greater than our marriages looking like what the kingdom of God looks like. So I think we're all working that out in our different ways, but just appreciate being able to talk about that today. So, all right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
This was fun. Alrighty. We're done.
All right.
Yes. Yeah. You gotta roll. You gotta go. I know.
Love you.
What time is it? Oh, we did pretty good.